I call this House to order and call upon the Record Secretary to read the minutes of the last public business meeting.
That was Malika's first time, so that was pretty good. I remember my first time, it was much more rough. But there were a lot of people watching, so it's kind of fun. So Sandy, our auditor and our CORSEC debates person on here tonight, they apparently they're feeling quite ill, they're quite sick. I'm already a doctor, so I don't know how serious this is, but they've got election fever. I heard they've got and I also assume that's why Phil Council aren't here, I'm assuming they're all ill. One member of Phil Council is here, but I'm assuming they're all ill. It's like when my dad missed my GCSE results day because he was going to a QPR game. This analogy does imply that I see Jack Palmer as like a daddy figure, which I do. But they're not the only ones missing tonight. Unfortunately, also on this, on the motion about women, families, and being mothers, the two women and mothers, not two women, the two mothers that we had speaking in the debate, and probably half the reason lots of you are here, Hazel Chu and Cillian Hickey, sorry, awfully English. They're not here, and it really sucks, but it's really good because it's kind of poetic, because the reason they aren't here is because they're dealing with some housework issues, which, and that's not untrue, I think they missed, they didn't have a babysitter or something like that. I think that sounds like an excuse to me, they just eat discourse or something. As you can probably tell, and it's kind of a theme for most of these debates, I generally don't have a speech that well prepared, so I kind of come up and I ramble for a bit. And this is an exception, because today I was sitting in the GMB about 5:30 and I didn't have anything to say, and then I had a eureka moment. I ran home, grabbed my notebook, because I had this really great joke, so everyone be ready. Referendum is pointless. What is it? Some kind of circle? Okay.
Are there any objections to my signing of these minutes as a true and accurate account of the last public business meeting? Then I shall duly sign. I'll just sign it. Okay, so welcome to our week 6 debate. We have debates here every Wednesday at 7:30 with free wine after, guys. It's a big pull. So the standing orders for this debate tonight are that speeches are 7 minutes in length with 10 minutes per guest, with the first and last minute being protected time, which will be signified by our lovely standing treasurer, Kitty. Fantastic. It's good fun. I really love that song. Good fun. So POIs are encouraged. So if you have from the audience, so if anyone has any questions, they're allowed to ask the speakers that outside of protected time. They are encouraged, but the speakers do not have to take them if they do not want to. We will also be allowing floor speeches tonight, so if you are really, really moved by the topic and really want to speak, you can pass the note up to me and we'll see about letting you give a short speech. So without further ado, I would like to call upon the first speaker, Athena Wu, to propose the motion to the House. Hear, hear.
I was kind of confused as to why they chose this motion for the Phil Collab, because I think there are a lot of motions out there that would be better suited to their comprehension ability. So, motions like this house likes stuff, this house will ban homework, and this house regrets the global belong to the dollar. I do think that it takes one to know one, and Phil would have a lot to say about being pointless, and before they didn't even have the decency to show up. So that worked very well. So I struggled a little with the wording of this motion because referendums clearly have a distinct purpose. So they're the only way to change the constitution. We can overturn outdated provisions about women. They're a democratic check on the government and on judges. So how can I get over this without making it seem like I'm cheating? So I think referendums are pointless, and specifically this referendum is pointless in the way that an unsharpened pencil is. So an unsharpened pencil, it has a purpose, that is writing or drawing, and it can execute it very to its ability, but when that point is missing, it doesn't produce the best piece of work or the best piece of artwork, or it fails to fulfill the expectations that people might have of a sharpened pointed pencil. So my argument is that the referendum is pointless in the sense that it does not give effect to radical change, it does not capture the interests of the people in the way that most people want or expect. The first thing I think is important is to debunk this idea that referendums are a sword wielded by the people, which I think will serve as an important framing for how we think about the March referendum. And I know that the McDonald's anecdotes bit has been overdone, and this is the last time I'll talk about it, but I think there is a very strong parallel here. So, the way that employee of the month is selected, the store manager nominates 5 employees, and she posts those 5 employees into a WhatsApp poll in the manager's group chat. So the managers vote on who they think should be employee of the month, and then by simple majority, the person with the most votes in that WhatsApp poll is awarded the best McDonald's employee of that period. But crucially, managers themselves cannot ever nominate the employees that they think will win. They can only pick from the list of 5 people that the store manager puts into the group chat. The store manager probably takes into account recommendations from the managers, but they have their own political agenda. Because if you objectively are the best worker, you leave no carbon on the meat when you're on the grill. You use the green tongs for picking up veggie dippers, you use purple for eggplant, and use white tongs for fish fingers out of the UHC. You also have to create the favour of the store manager. And even if you do that, the store manager still uses the employee of the month as a tool to enforce the culture that she wants. So it's not the worker that takes the initiative, but the most submissive worker who is awarded, or the worker that they think will stay in McDonald's the longest.
POI?
Of course.
Have you gotten employee of the month?
Thank you for mentioning it. I actually did get it. Despite being the best worker for November and December, I did not get it because it's a political tool. And also, if you only knew what I was risking by telling you this information, so do not let it leave this room. So what am I trying to say here? There's probably 3 general points. The first is that the agenda of referendums is controlled by elite interests under the guise of a vote by the people. So referendums are wielded as a political tool to get things passed that politicians want. The new provision is vague, it is unclear, it puts a very low burden on the state that they shall strive to support, not the wording that was recommended by the Citizens' Assembly, but the one that they thought would get them out the most. And this is no accident. The second point is that this referendum is not really an indication that change through the people is on the rise. Referendums are not an easy or accessible way to instigate change. So even if every person in the country wanted to change a constitutional provision, it can only be activated by the government. So the government still just does what they want to do, and people are no more powerful in that context and after the referendum to change that. The third thing is that the sad reality is that climbing the ranks in McDonald's is a political game. I've been on the fence as to whether I should stay or hand in my notice, and so I would like to take the opportunity to put it to the people. If you think that I should leave my job, please raise your hand, and I promise I will hand in my notice if you do. And if you don't think I should leave my job, please raise your hand. Okay. I want to point out that a lot of people believe this upcoming referendum will produce a material change in policies which economically enfranchise women. But it is far from making meaningful change to any people on the ground. Why? The first thing is that if the amendment passes, this is just an indication that cultural change has already happened. So it doesn't increase the probability of people voting for more progressive policies for women. But the second is that in most cases, the Constitution is just a bad way to enact social change, because it doesn't enforce any positive obligations on the legislature or the government to act. So this referendum won't give the government any legal duty to make women's lives better in any material way, but it will be celebrated as if they have. Thirdly, it might actually be counterproductive, because our limited political capital is spent on a symbolic change to our constitution, where it could be spent actually giving state support to things like victims of domestic abuse who are forced to raise children all on their own. So the political energy following the 8th of March referendum will need to at least recharge before the electorate is politically willing to galvanize support to enact more change. And in the meantime, we put a band-aid fix on the issues that affect women at large. Fourthly, this specific provision that we are changing doesn't really do that much harm in the status quo because it's not really cited or raised in the courts, so repealing it won't reduce any of that active harm. So do referendums have benefits? Of course they do. But are they the powerful plebiscite that we make them out to be? I suggest that they are not. And the last thing is that even if you don't believe any of that, hear me here. Referendums are pointless because everything is pointless, because everything dies eventually.
We thank that speaker for that fine speech and call upon Ella O'Neill to open the case for the opposition.
Right, okay. I only found out I was speaking in this debate for sure, like 3 hours ago. So I was going to start this debate with some jokes. I canvassed this committee and I asked them for their best referendum jokes. But Athena ended her speech on kind of negative and like downward note, and I think the joke might make you a little bit sadder. So I think we'll skip that, maybe some if things need to be picked up later on. But this is my first real hist chamber speech. Voting ever, because there's been no elections since I became eligible to vote. So it would be really, really sad if it was pointless and didn't mean anything. So for that reason alone, I think the referendum is good and has value because I get to vote and it's cool for me. But what I'm actually going to talk about is symbolism and why symbolism is good, and even if this constitutional change is just a symbolic one, it still has a benefit and it's still good, and also will live at the marriage ban. We'll get into that later on. So, I work in the old library in Kells on campus. Some Kells farm. Which is the longest single room library in Europe. And then along with this long single room library, there's these statues of men. And they were put there originally in the 1700s as like the big figures. So you've got Aristotle, you've got Shakespeare, you've got Hamilton. All these guys are meant to inspire the students studying in the library. And up until last year, they were all men. And then a year ago, they added in 4 new women, and the college were so proud of themselves, like, look at us being feminists, to this old library, and I thought, that's really stupid. This is like, of all the like big changes I want for women in the college, it's definitely not like 4 statues of women in the old library. I don't care about that. That doesn't matter, it's not important. But then I worked there, and as part of my job, I would stand next to the statues, and I'd ask people's questions, and I'd talk to people about them, and I would see people see the statues. And see women of all ages, from like very young girls to elderly women, see women being represented in this historical and like prestigious space, and seeing that that mattered to them, and seeing that that was important. And even though it was just a symbolic change, and this like overall doesn't really achieve that much for feminism, which is like true, because like putting women in a library doesn't really do anything. It's still kind of cool to see yourself as a woman in the library and to talk to young girls about Rosalind Franklin and to tell them what she did. And to have this like visual representation of women in a space that had just been male for so long. So while Athena is right in saying that the Constitution really won't drive any substantial change for women, that the social change has already happened, making the Constitution reflect a modern Ireland is still important. And when women are like perusing the Constitution, as we all do, I'm sure they're looking through each line, it's important that they don't read lines that are like sexist or like to their detriment. Also, Athena said that this provision in the Constitution doesn't really do much harm in the status quo. It's not put in the courts, people don't talk about it often. But that's not always been true in Ireland, and it has been like the foundation for the marriage ban that was in place until 1973, a crazy long time to prevent women from working after they got married, and something we only got rid of because the EU was like, you can't do that, it's sexist. So it did have real world implications that we're still seeing to this day with like reduced women in government and like the wage gap. So even if this specific line of the Constitution is not cited in law and in the courts to demean women, it's still bad, and we shouldn't have it because it is a remnant of this like sexist Ireland that we're trying to move away from and trying to break free from. So it's really not good to have it in there. I have something else to say. Oh, discourse is good. We're happy to do that. So true, thank you. That even if we don't make any like real change for women, and we don't like the thing for carers is like not that great because of the ableist, which is like not good. We still get to talk about carers and their work, which we haven't really talked And we get to say there's still sexist things in the Constitution that we have to move on from, and that we should probably get rid of. And even if it doesn't say women's places in the home, which like some male politicians and journalists like to cite, like, there's women's places in the home, gotcha, it's still like not good. And it still differentiates unnecessarily between women and men, and mothers and fathers. And that is negative. And having the opportunity to talk about it, and having a constitution, even if it is having a referendum, even if it is just to make symbolic change that won't actually have any real effect on the laws or the country, how the country is run today, that being able to have a debate about carers and about women's place in the home, not in the home, is still beneficial and like worthy of all the big fanfare that's happening. I think that's something else I want to respond to, but I can't remember. Do the jokes. This is the other joke. I pointed a lot at him. I love referendums so much. How much do I love referendums? So much, I'm going to have 2 of them. Also, yeah. I actually just asked that for jokes. How many referendums did it take to fix misogyny? 2. We will end on that note. And we should get rid of misogynistic things, even if it doesn't really mean anything in today's world. Thank you.
We thank Ella for that fine speech. Just before I call on our next speaker, you guys were all handed RFG returns as you came in. So on the back of those RFG returns is actually the suggested changing of the wording for the referendum, just for fun references. But also, please fill those out and hand them into Owen on your way out, please, because we actually use these to award prizes at the end of the year for our speakers. So with that little notice in mind, I call upon our next speaker, Colum Kenny, to continue the case for the proposition. Hear, hear.
Thank you very much. It's an honour to be invited to speaker tonight. They told me that the former members had included us for a while. That made me nervous, and Samuel Beckett made me more nervous. And then Wolf told me, but if they had told me that it was going to be, an employee of the year here, I think I would have stayed home. I was interested to hear the first speaker talking about the busts in the long room. They had a competition, they requested a proposal for names for additional busts of women about 3 years ago now. And I actually wrote in here to the Chancellor University and suggested that they put Mary Pollard there. Many of you may not know Mary Pollard. She was a long-time librarian in Trinity and was a wonderful intellect and a wonderful lover of learning. But unfortunately, she had received an honorary doctorate presented by Mary Robinson, I think it was. But unfortunately, she didn't grow up. And I suspect that had to do with politics. Just like this referendum has to do with politics. I think this is we've heard already that it's not going to do anything. The best case, apparently, that the yes side can make is this isn't going to make a difference, but it's symbolic. I don't think I think what it's symbolic is patronising women and not doing what women's organisations and disability organisations and the Citizens' Assembly asked. They've all said this doesn't do what they wanted, but they're saying it's a step in the right direction. In my view, it's a step in the direction of the next general election. I think you should give it right back to the government if they don't do something substantial. I think it is literally pointless. I think whatever way you vote on this, it's going to make no difference because of the way this has been brought forward. So is there a reason to vote no? In my opinion, there is. I don't think you should toy with the Constitution. I think you should send a clear signal to governments that want to use the Constitution to get popularity and to avoid a commitment to change, to tell them not to do it. This will do nothing for carers. As regards the provisions themselves, you have them in front of you. They want to take out a provision. This is a provision that has been misrepresented by a number of government ministers are saying that a woman's place is in the home. It doesn't say that, and we've had an authority on this in the case of Synod versus Ireland. Miss Justice Denham, as she then was, who later became the Chief Justice of Ireland, observed in her judgment that Article 41 does not assign women a domestic role. In fact, it recognises the significant role played by wives and mothers in the home. This recognition and acknowledgement does not exclude women and mothers from other roles and activities. I don't think it's symbolically, I'm not sure how you handle introductions. Does it eat into my time?
Yeah, but if you keep...
Go ahead.
It doesn't preclude women from working at the home, but Alison, the reason for doing working in past the marriage office is until 1973 didn't allow women to work.
That was legislation. That wasn't the Constitution. And they changed that in legislation. Just as now they could bring in a lot of carers. There's no legislation waiting here to be brought in. In fact, there's no legislation even defining what they mean when they use terms like durable relation. They tell you it is, to respect other forms of marriage. Yet on Sunday, at the Sunday Independent, we had Roderick O'Gorman saying, somebody in a durable relationship doesn't have the whole range of rights that a married couple has, because married couples have a whole range of rights set out in primary legislation that apply to married couples. That's the minister telling me. I find it very hard to understand why people are so enthusiastic to have a yes vote.
Well, if that's the case, would this not help people in durable relationships to get more rights or similar rights as married couples?
No, he said it won't make any difference to them. That's the minister. There's no definition of durable relationship. If a man has a wife and he has a long-term mistress, could that be a durable relationship? Which would give that mistress, whether the mistress is a woman or a man, they could give them a right to the family farm rights. We simply don't know. They're putting it into the courts. And for a long time they did this with contraception, gay rights, and abortion. And we know what happened. It was a disaster. And the judges didn't want it. It's an avoidance of responsibility. Where that provision came from on women, by the way, you should know historically. It began on the 14th of October 1882 with the birth of a little baby on the corner of 51st Street and Lexington Avenue to an Irish domestic servant whose husband had left. And she'd gone into a Protestant institution for poor women and gave birth to this child, whom she called George that night. And she tried to work and look after that child for 2.5 years and had to give up in the end. And she sent the child home to her bachelor uncle in County Limerick to be reared by that bachelor uncle and an ailing grandmother. And that child, his name had been changed in the meantime of baptism to Edward. And he wanted to go back to America, but she couldn't take him. And he grew up. And when that child became Taoiseach, as Eamon de Valera after he changed his name to Eamon, he knew about the reality of women trying to look after babies and bring them up at home. Now, it's not popular to speak about Eamon de Valera. He's a demon figure. And of course, surrounding this provision, there were conservative attitudes. But that doesn't make it wrong. Taking it out of the Constitution, taking a reference to the position of mothers within the home or to women working outside the home doesn't strengthen their position. You could make this gender neutral by saying that the government commits itself to ensuring that both parents don't work outside the home. Instead of taking it out and putting in something completely different, a vague provision about caring that shows the government's to strive to help families to support one another. Now, they don't define what a carer is, and they don't define who this covers. The Minister has already said in an interview on my radio, this will not have any significance, for instance, for home helps or for non-family members who care. The word carer isn't even used. And it shifts from a position which is admittedly weak in relation to women working outside the home, with a language that's inadequate, to an even weaker provision. And it shifts the responsibility from the government having to strive to support women who want to work outside the home, that they shouldn't have to stay at home, to a position where they pledge to help the family to look after its own members. And that's quite ideological. So, there are no supports, financial or otherwise, ready to come on stream as a result of this referendum. They haven't promised, like in the past we've had a situation where there's legislation promised on gay rights or whatever, if a referendum is passed. There's nothing here. Nothing to define what a carer is, nothing to define what a durable relationship is, nothing to say there's going to be new rights for people who have real issues at the moment in relation to caring for people. The political parties, I think you should be careful when they all agree. An issue, is it? Sinn Féin, as usual, one thinks both ways. The parties calling for a yes vote while damning the proposal at the same time. And they're saying they're going to bring in their own referendum. Well, I mean, maybe if you send it back, to the government, maybe that will make them think that they should bring in something more adequate than what is proposed. Several groups that have been calling for a referendum on carers and the families admit that the referendum is not what they really wanted. So what I'm saying is you should vote no then. It's pathetic for women's groups and rights organisations who know that the referendum is really to go around saying it's a step in the right direction. They're denying political reality. It's true, perhaps, that you can regard the original provision that they're taking out as patronising. I mean, it was of its time in 1939. Yes, it was patronising. But what do you expect from Ava Murphy? But I mean, if Ava Murphy was patting women on the head, what's Leo doing now with this particular piece of legislation? Do you really think this is the best that the government could do in terms of the wording of the Constitution when it comes to supporting women working outside the home? There are real issues here. I mean, young women I know, my daughters will know, other young women, they're trying to work, look after family in a housing crisis, in a situation where childcare costs are high, in a situation where the cost of living is rising. This isn't going to help them in any way whatsoever. They're already out there. It's as if this is some kind of yesterday symbolic of the fight. And I don't think you should allow the government to interfere with the Constitution.
Do you think that it might be the case that because of that crisis that you mentioned there, that women are kind of being obliged by economic necessity to engage in the labour force instead of their role at home? Do you think that they're kind of trying to avoid maybe a future crisis where women are claiming benefits because of the current constitution, and they might be trying to get weasel their way out of it?
Well, there are certainly some practitioners in law who believe that this is part of what's going on here, that the existing article may in fact have more clout, and in terms of what Mr. Justice Kennedy said, that it might actually have some form of legal application, although constitutions generally are not a particularly good place to put aspirational expressions. Terms like shall, strive, the word shall in law does tend to have some kind of compulsive meaning, but nobody's quite clear what that is. So you could be right. But I think, both parties, men and women, are trying at the moment to have a healthy lifestyle balance. And there should be protection for both of them in a way to try to ensure that people are guaranteed sufficient income that they can look after children, at least to some extent at home. Because there's a lot of upset being caused at the moment by the extent to which, both people going out to work, long commuting and so on, is making it extremely difficult for children. And the children don't get much of a look in this debate at all, and what might be best for them. On the National Women's Council page today, they put up a remarkable article by a professor at the University of Limerick. And I'm just going to read you before I finish a couple of lines from this, because I actually think it makes the case not for a yes vote, which they think it does, but for a no vote. Dr. Laura Cahavane says, "It's a disappointment that the stronger wording recommended by the Citizens' Assembly was rejected by the government." She says it's clear there's no intention to place any concrete duty on the state in this regard in relation to carers. She says the current provision, which we've heard is so terrible, has had minimal real impact, and it's unlikely that its replacement will be any different. This is somebody who wants a yes vote. And then she says, the answer is that what we put in our constitution matters even if it's primarily symbolic. Well, it boils down to what you think it's symbolic of. If you think it's symbolic of this government's serious commitment to carers when they haven't brought forward any legislation that indicates that they propose to do anything to help carers, then maybe you should vote in favour. But if you think it's symbolic of the government's public relations and avoidance of real commitments, and that they're going to come along at election time and put it out of the back pocket and say, look, we did something for women and for carers, and all the women's organisations and all the rights organisations approved of it, then I think you're being naive, and I'd ask you to think again and to vote.
We've thank that speaker for that very fine speech and call upon Ava Murphy to continue the case for the opposition. Hear, hear.
Ladies, gentlemen, distinguished guests, not so distinguished guests. Sorry, my throat there. Oh my god. My name is Ava Murphy, and when I did get told I was speaking in this debate a week ago, I kind of wrote my speech on the bus. But if there's one thing I'm going to do, is yap. If there's one thing I love to yap about, it's women. I'm sadly non-practicing bisexual and too terrified to ever actually speak to a woman. I think they're pretty cool. I also think the depiction of women in the Irish Constitution have been regressive and reductive for far too long. Its understanding of the family has been centered around antiquated and traditional ideas of what constitutes a durable relationship. I know what you're all thinking. Ava, you're a debater. What on earth do you know about women or about relationships? Well, you may have a point. Any of you who know me know that also that I'm a law student, and while I'm criminally behind on my readings and never go to my lectures, my degree does enable me to talk about stuff like this referendum until you're also fed up that you admit I'm right anyway. So that's what I'm gonna do. We do three things in this speech. Firstly, clarify what the referendum actually does. Secondly, I'm going to ask you all to think of the children. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about why even if this referendum doesn't do much in terms of direct, tangible benefits, it still has strong signaling benefits that we shouldn't just cast aside like the top claims that we should. Firstly, what does this referendum do and what happens when it gets put into place? I'd like to posit that, first of all, on both sides of this debate, people aren't going to likely just go to court to fight for constitutional protection, because quite simply, it's not every day that your constitutional rights get violated, no matter how many times it may feel like it for me when I have to go in for a 9 a.m. and I'm just a girl, guys. What it means is that while the initial court cases involving these new changes to the Constitution may take more time to deliberate and to interpret, it's not like you're just suddenly opening the floodgates, especially when it's still only the most important and most contentious cases that make it all the way up to the Supreme Court. So even if we do have a slight increase in things like bureaucracy, I think it's very much worth it if it means you have more types of families and more carers protected by the state. Now here, let's touch on some common criticisms and misconceptions about the referendum, things that were raised by the other side. The first one being that it's too vague to have any effect. I think it's important to note how important it is that language in the new amendment is less specific, because this is actually what opens up constitutional protection for more people. It was the specificity and the restrictiveness of the old wording that locked out so many people and confined protection for carers solely to mother. Now I'm going to do just a bit of obnoxious competitive debating stuff. It's kind of a trade-off between access to constitutional protection and restrictiveness of wording. I think I'd much rather have an open-ended constitutional clause that can allow more people access to the courtroom, whether it's a carer who is in a trad life or a family not built upon marriage. But a durable relationship, and I'll tell you what a durable relationship is, I think it's a healthy, loving, trusting, long-term relationship. So basically, nothing that ever happens in the GOP. Guys, this is what happens when you date debaters. Don't do it. Ultimately, when these amendments come to be interpreted by the courts, there will likely be criteria put into places by judges and legal experts that getting people into the courtroom to advocate for themselves, allowing them to push for retribution from the state, is a benefit in and of itself. I think it's much more favourable to leave these criteria up to people in the legal profession who can see these cases all the time, not to politicians who are under so much external influences. Finally, I want to posit the idea that voting no isn't necessarily a vote in the right direction, especially when op-conceded governments are reluctant to do anything tangible. The government are chronically inert and resistant to large-scale change for structural reasons like the difficulty of adapting our institutions, the cost of having another referendum. I don't think it's likely that they're just going to decide that this one didn't work and they're going to do another one. I think it's much more likely that they won't have another referendum at all, maybe kick it 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the line, another 50 years of the Constitution that doesn't serve us. Okay, now with the boring law student stuff out of the way, I want to urge you now all to think of the children, the many reasons why families may not look like they did almost 100 years ago. The truth is, the 1930s nuclear family has long since been forgotten. You know that 40% of children now are born to unmarried parents, to parents who were left without a partner, parents who have begun the process of starting a blended family, or parents who simply never saw the point in getting married at all. Now, I almost feel obliged to ask this, but what about the Thropies? Do you dare tell them they're not a family? The Constitution does. I think the era for marriage, both due to changing social attitudes and changing financial situations, these many couples are now beginning to see marriage as something quite outdated and quite antiquated, an unnecessary formality, or even a patriarchal creation built off the idea of giving away the bride to a new family. And this notion of marriage is arbitrary, as well as the cost of living crisis means that significant amounts of parents are just choosing to forego that process altogether, instead focus on saving money for the good of their children, rather than spending it on an unnecessary ceremony. But instead of helping and welcoming the parents who make this sacrifice, the Constitution locks them out. It tells them that just because their family doesn't fit the mold the state has created, the state has no obligation and no interest to give them the protection they deserve. If these people have their rights are infringed upon by those around them, by their workplace, or by the government itself, they cannot seek protection under a constitutional right, a uniquely powerful legal tool that could so easily be the gateway to them finally getting retribution, being able to sue the state for what they're being owed, for what they've so desperately fought for. When parents aren't able to seek the same protection from the state as a traditional nuclear family can, it's the children who bear the brunt of the effect. I'd like to ask you all to think of those children today. Ultimately, even if this referendum does nothing practical, even if it doesn't directly produce material change, there are huge signaling benefits associated with changing the status of women in the Constitution, with getting rid of the idea of recognizing women as a whole, not just those who choose to be mothers, as homemakers. As someone who grew up with a stay-at-home mom, I know all too well that there is great honor and sacrifice in this that goes unnoticed, unpaid, and underappreciated. But the problem is, this isn't a sacrifice that every woman wants to make. Not every woman feels represented by this. For some, it even feels oppressive. It's not a reference to mothers, it is an indiscriminate reference to all women. I don't want to live in a country where the founding document the state is built upon sees me as having gender-specific responsibilities in the home, and has historically wanted to keep me there as having some sort of special role in the home, when, like, have you seen the absolute state of my apartment? That is really like, maybe there's something special about me as a woman, but, like, that's not my ability to that's my autism diagnosis. In all seriousness, for some women, being a homemaker doesn't make them feel satisfied. It makes them feel trapped. It is this rhetoric that has locked women out of the workplace until the marriage ban that my colleague talked about was repealed in the 70s and perpetuated stigma on working mothers to this day. It is a relic of a bygone era, and I see no practical reason to keep it in the Constitution. This is why the referendum is not pointless, ladies and gentlemen, because it shows that we are no longer a country that is willing to put women into a box, to reduce them to nothing but homemakers, and scarcely acknowledge them, if anything more. It also shows we are no longer willing to ignore the existence of non-traditional families, because for us, maybe it's out of sight, out of mind, but not for them. This is why you should oppose this motion, is at very, very least, we show the world that we stand for equality over injustice, and we can no longer pretend that Ireland is the same place that it was when this constitution was drafted. I am so proud to oppose.
Speech, and just a reminder that if you feel really moved to speak on either side of the debate, to please pass a note up to me and we will allow short floor speeches at the end. And with that in mind, I'd like to call upon James Ryan to close the case for the proposition. Hear, hear.
Speaker, esteemed members of the House, my name is James Ryan, and I shall be emphatically proposing the motion put forward this evening that this House believes the referendum is useless. Now, to most of the population and to everybody here this evening, I'd say the wording of this referendum, the referendum itself, is kind of as mysterious and uncertain as Kate Middleton's current location. She, of course, being the only famous KM not on this debate this evening. That was a thinker, guys. Latest polling does show, though, that more than half the population says they have no idea what we're even voting on. But tonight I will tell you what exactly it is. It is an exercise of futility by a government eager to just have some nebulous social progress on the record as we trundle forward into an election year. It is a legally confusing and willfully tame proposal. And even further than that, it has provisions that are actively detrimental towards some of our society's most vulnerable people, for no other reason than to absolve our politicians of any real responsibility towards those they claim to represent. Now, to begin with the referendum on the legal definition of the family. The opposition will claim that this change will finally vindicate a bunch of legal rights of unmarried parents, of couples, of a litany of other socially accepted relationships the courts have yet to recognise. But they're missing a crucial detail here. Expanding the meaning of the family does not automatically mean that everyone deserving of protection will get it. The government has to draft legislation specifying the limits of this new brand of family. However, many activists, many of those even in favour of the referendum yes vote, including FLAC, have said the government has no plans to do this, and so our only alternative available is years of contentious court battles in order to finally let the Supreme Court decide what the meaning of this referendum actually is. And as a prospective sadist, or as I prefer to be called, lawyer, this referendum left me with all sorts of questions. When does a durable relationship start? What happens when one ends? Will the courts finally legally recognise the situationship? The limits of this new status quo can only be decided by the Supreme Court. And this consists of Ireland's safest, most pragmatic legal practitioners. I was once told in a legal lecture in this exact institution, actually, that while many revolutionaries have been lawyers, none of them have been judges. And these people were assigning to revolutionise our human rights in this country. I think leaving the development of our rights and these rights to a bunch of 65-year-old unelected UCD graduates is no way to push social progress forward. Instead, I propose we leave it to the democratically elected Trinity graduates in the dog. And on the second proposal, the government seeks out approval to remove this dated, misogynistic, patriarchal article from the Constitution. And were the referendum purely to remove that, they would have my vote every day and twice on Sunday. But that is not the case. They are instead inserting a harmful, ableist, lazy provision, recognising the provision of care by the family for each other in a social good, and they should strive to support that social care of the family. Strive to support it. That sounds fine on the surface, until you realise this has no legal obligation whatsoever. They can try to help carers or not. There's no urgency whatsoever, nor any judgments or punishments or accountability, no thank you, should they fail in this striving. And as of right now, they are failing. We're consistently falling behind the minimum requirements set out for us by the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This is an assignment we signed 17 years ago, and we're still falling behind. Worse still, the wording sort of conflates care within the home and the family, acting as though people with different conditions don't require specialised medical treatment to live the life that they as citizens truly deserve. In fact, the scoliosis surgery crisis that gripped Ireland last year should really show you the willful neglect of those who need our care by the government. Back in 2017, it was promised by our health minister at that time, Simon Harris, that no child should have to wait more than 4 months for a vital scoliosis spine surgery in this country. There are currently now more children on that waiting list than when he made that initial statement. In fact, the only reason why waiting lists have reduced in recent years is because we're forcing overworked and under-supported families to turn to the private sector and fork out even more money to do things that the government should be providing for them. And so, we're having to make them delegate their sick children to the private sector. And now persons with disabilities, their carers, and their families, in my opinion, are treated with utter contempt by the Irish state. And I've been the unfortunate witness of this during my own time and within my own family, hence a passion for this issue. A huge wait list to see a specialist, missing crucial stages of a child's development and denying them their own future. Being means-tested out of carers allowance for making too much money while trying to save in Dublin and rent and try to afford a home. Once they even have this home, they're denied a grant to retrofit it to actually make it suitable for those for persons with disabilities. And even for more independent people who have disabilities in this country, the disability allowance doesn't even cover the additional cost of having a disability of €11,000 a year, let alone helping those who need it to supplement their own income. And since they don't seem to be a voting bloc worthy of political attention by the Irish political class, they're given just enough to get by. In my opinion, this is the largest missed opportunity for disability rights in this country in our history. It was a chance to hold our own government accountable for their continued failure towards their citizens, and all it has been is watered down to this pathetic commitment to try and do that at some stage in the future. Do not let the bright signs and the ads fool you. This referendum isn't just to modernise our outdated constitution. It is an attempt to actively undermine the rights of our most vulnerable under the veneer of progressive social policy for a floundering, unpopular government. Putting this whole exercise on International Women's Day, I think, really says it all. They're placing the emphasis on what is being taken out and sneakily failing to mention what is being put in. Please, I implore you, do not reward our political class for this fair-weather feminism, and please see through the PR spin doctors and gaze upon this referendum for what it truly is: useless. I will make one final plea to you about the uselessness of this proposal. In the Irish Times, in an article in favour of these referendums, a columnist opined, voting yes to the deletion of Article 41.2 is not going to change anyone's life. Well, I think that voting no to the insertion of the inadequate carers amendment might just help change someone else's. Thank you all very much.
Very fine speech, and call upon Cillian Hickey to close the case for the opposition. Hear, hear.
Do not be fooled by what the opposite or what the proposition tells you about these referendums. They express their fear, their trepidation about the meaning of these words, and apparent shock that words can have many meanings. All of you have taken error with the word strive in this referendum. But can I ask you, what word would you prefer? Endeavour? Toil? Work? This, as I will explain to you, this is an effort at change. It is not perfect. It may not bring about instant equality for women in Ireland, but it is an effort. Everyone on this bench would have things stay the same in Ireland. They would have things stay symbolically similar. Okay, I'll start off with an anecdote which should illustrate something about this referendum. As I was walking down Kildare Street the other day, past Leinster House, there was a group of people there protesting. Older people, kind of ripe of age. Both young and old. They were holding up placards emblazoned with the words "No, no." And though I rushed by lest they should flick me with holy water for making a cross with their placards to scare me away, I did hear a distinctive phrase that they uttered. The referendums are a scheme to further the LGBT and trans agendas. At the time, I thought this was pretty weird, but on second thought, maybe it was just the Theo campaigning again. A film from the GMB or something. These protesters outside the Leinster House, they're indicative of the fear and ignorance around these referendums which will take place. In an Irish Times poll recently, over half of people admitted to saying that they haven't a clue what they will vote for on March the 8th. So to quote Marvin Gaye and Rory Gallagher, what's going on? Though we're debating about the second referendum, the one specifically about women's place in the home, these two are linked since they both have the word family. The first referendum, the family amendment, this will broaden the constitutional definition of families. Though, again, these people have expressed their great fear on what this will mean, on what durable relationships mean. This will probably include things like long-term partners who, for whatever reason, don't want to get married. After all, marriages are expensive. These days, they're two-day events. Like, a lot of people, especially from working-class backgrounds, may choose to avoid the marriage due to the great cost of it.
Do I?
No. The second referendum, the care referendum, it will update this outdated language, which we have already mentioned several times. This language, which to clarify says, the state recognizes that by her life within the home, woman gives to the state a support without which the common good can't be achieved. This common good mentioned is very uncommon, actually. It's the good of men. So let's look at this original article, this archaic language. It was written in 1937, as said by Colum, while Ava Murphy was Taoiseach. This was a profoundly conservative and Catholic Ireland era in modern Irish history. So the language of 441.2, it recalls De Valera's 1943 St. Patrick's Day speech, known as Dancing at the Crossroads, where he mentions happy maidens whose firesides would be the forum of serene old age. So basically, these articles are products of the past. They have no place in our current constitution today, or our current society. As Ella mentioned, these are reminiscent of the marriage ban which existed, or the marriage bar which existed in Ireland for most of the 20th century. And to clarify for those who have social lives, this wasn't a swingers club for like middle-aged couples trying to This law meant that women working in the public sector had to quit their jobs upon marrying to care for children and all that. I won't claim that this referendum will bring about instant equality for women. But that doesn't mean it's pointless. For something to be, though, as Athena said, everything is pointless. Is working at McDonald's really that bad? I don't think we can trust what's said there by such a nihilistic nitpicker.
Order! Don't insult our McDonald's employee at the moment.
So admittedly, the referendum, it won't change tangible problems in Ireland today. It makes sense in a way that the government wants to remove the mention to women's place in the home, since they cannot provide so many young people with homes today. What's the take to increase the equality of women? This will be, admittedly, a slow process to make women completely equal now. The first step is men having to share the burden in housework. For example, my own mother, who was, like Ava's, a stay-at-home mother, she was blessed with 4 sons. Me, as the one who helped her with housework and cooking, was the daughter of the family. I swear, I'm not in a film. And so this referendum, this change for complete equality, it won't be brought about by this referendum all of a sudden. It can't be. But this referendum, it's an effort to bring about change. It's a step away from the regressive society Ireland was. It's not pointless. It's only pointless if you believe that our country won't change. The nature of democracy is that a state should represent its people's beliefs. So this referendum is only pointless if you don't want our constitution to represent our beliefs. And though there will be challenges as outlined, this referendum will try to change. It makes an effort to make things better. Thank you.
Really thank that for that fine speech. So before we put the question to the House, we have 2 floor speeches. So the first floor speaker will be Sawicka on the proposition. So these will be 3 minutes in length, with the first and last 30 seconds being protected time. Again, POIs are encouraged, but speakers do not have to take them. So, Anna.
Let me just set up my timer.
Shane.
Okay, so first of all, just to address this, anecdote we got from Cillian about LGBTQ people. To be clear, if this was like an agenda against LGBTQ people, there would be a point to the referendum, but this is not the case. So I just want to clarify what the debate is actually about, right? Because I think that somehow throughout the debate, it seemed like on side the position we have to defend that the referendum is actually going to be harmful. This is not really the case, right? Like, personally, I don't really care if you vote yes or no. Actually, I mean, I probably would sort of myself vote yes if I had voted right in Ireland, which I don't. But I think that the actual burden on our side is just to show that this referendum is not going to change anything, right? And I think that we got 2 main points from side opposition. So first of all, we got points about how this is likely to be some sort of like a symbolic change, in the sense that this is something that is important to the people. Second of all, that this is going to essentially open an avenue for actual important legislative change. Actually, I'm going to start with the second point, because why not? I don't think that this is opening avenue for actual change, right? Because I think that there are good reasons for politicians not to do this. I think that, probably if you have political capital that you can spend on different things, you probably wanted to spend on things that are going to make sure that as many people as possible are supporting you as a politician. And if, ensuring that there are more rights for women and so on was the thing that would ensure that we have more votes, this is exactly what we would have done, right? And clearly this is not what politicians are doing, so this probably is not particularly advantageous to them. And I don't think that this is something that is going to happen just because of the change in the wording of the Constitution. If any change happens further down the road, it will be because of the current political climate and not because of the change that happened in the wording of the Constitution. And then secondly, on the symbolical change. So, look, I don't know how often you guys read Constitution. I usually don't do this like every night before, going to bed. And this is not something that is on my mind all the time. And I think that for most people, I know that people are like, oh, this is the most important document in the country. Probably very few people actually read the Constitution, right? And I don't think that they particularly care about what the Constitution represents them specifically. I think that what they care about is actual change, actual laws. And the change of phrasing alone, well, perhaps in the moment it seems like a bit of a triumph. Perhaps you think, oh, this actually is something that, feels more like a country that you would want to live in. Very quickly, this is going to be replaced by brutal reality, where no changes are actually made, where still you're discriminated just like you were before, and nothing, in fact, changes the referendum's findings.
I'd now like to call on Oisín Browne to give a floor speech on the side of the opposition.
I want to begin by saying that I mostly agree with what the proposition side has said in this debate, and disagree with most of what we've heard what the opposition side has said in this debate. However, what I'm going to do is go a step further and say that the referendum is not pointless because it causes active harm to the people in most need in our society, that is, people with disabilities. Ava says that the current article is a relic of a bygone era. The problem is that we're replacing it by entrenching a disgusting, detestable, and deplorable status quo for people with disabilities. The new wording says there are carers and there are simply subjects of care within the family unit. I think this was put best by Senator Tom Pullman when he said, "When care is confined to the family, nobody can hear you scream, see you cry, or see you break." The wording of the 42B Care Amendment reneges on fundamental rights for disabled citizens to independent, autonomous life and community with state supports. But if we take an intersectional view of this amendment, we see that this view is degrading and borderline demonic. The disabled women who are confined to the home by necessity, economic or otherwise, deserve our support and deserve our care. The state's care that they renege on in this amendment. A shameful lack of such care is most clearly indicated by the government's white paper on people with disabilities. This policy proposal suggests forcing disabled people into work based on rigid, painful, and invasive scrutiny by the state. I say this is disgusting and shameful. Disabled people are not even mentioned in the Constitution, and the state has shown that it only values them insofar as they bring economic fruits to the labour market. This is already indicated by the invalidity pension that is paid to people like my mother because of their inability to work. You are invalid if you cannot work, you don't exist, and you don't matter, and to the state that is all that matters. This is a disgusting amendment, and you should vote no. But even if you think that this symbolism doesn't matter, I would say that this referendum is not pointless anyways, because the discourse itself is harmful, taking opposition at their best while speaking on opposition. Every time we pit women against disabled people, many of whom are women, we force disabled people to toil over their own right to exist and to be denied for the sake of simply saying, well, this is a step in the right direction for women. This referendum is not pointless because it is actively harmful to these people, regardless of the result on voting day. For those reasons, you should vote no, and you should side with the opposition this evening. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank Oisín for that fine speech and everyone for what was a very wonderful debate. And I will now put the question to the House. So, on the motion that this House believes the referendum is pointless, all those in favour, please vote aye.
Aye.
All those against, please vote nay.
Nay!
Oh, okay. We're we're going to do it one more time, guys. So, all those in favour, please vote aye. Aye. All those against, please vote nay.
Nay! Oh, shit. Just what do you think?
Okay,
Okay.
Okay.
I think people are
So, I
people are voting. They're so confused they're voting yes and no.
Thanks, Oisín. You guys have it, yeah.
The motion is carried. So just before we say our goodbyes, I would like to just remind you all to please fill in your arbitrary returns because you see you can either hand them to Owen or pop them into the box.